The warships came on a Tuesday morning, and nobody was ready for them. They did not come quietly. 40 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, at the same moment appearing in Earth's orbit like a wall of dark iron. Each ship was enormous. The smallest one was 3 times the size of any human carrier. They had no lights on their hulls, no signals, no flags. They simply appeared and sat there, heavy and silent, like a sentence written in a language that meant only one thing. People on the ground saw them first, through telescopes, then through news cameras, then through the windows of their homes as the morning sky took on a faint shadow it had never carried before. Children pointed, adults stopped walking, traffic stopped moving. The whole planet seemed to take one long breath and hold it. The message came 11 minutes later. It did not come through official channels. It did not come through any signal the human space agencies were monitoring. It came through everything at once. Televisions, phones, radios, computers, public screens in city squares from New York to Nairobi. Every device on Earth carried the same voice at the same moment, speaking in flat, perfect English. People of this world, you are now under the authority of the Vorkai Empire. You have 72 hours to broadcast your full surrender. After that time, we will begin destroying your cities, starting from the largest and moving down. There will be no second message. There will be no negotiation. This is the only communication you will receive. Then silence. Just like that, 72 hours, no room for questions, no name given, no face shown. Just a countdown that started the moment the message ended, and 40 warships sitting in the sky to make sure everyone understood it was real. Admiral Dale Cooper was in Washington. When the message played, he was in a meeting about budget allocations, which suddenly felt like the least important thing that had ever happened in human history. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked out of the room. Without a word, his aide was already on the phone behind him, and by the time Dale reached the corridor, the building was already shifting into a different kind of energy. Doors opening, people moving fast, voices dropping low, the way they do when the situation is too serious for noise. He was in the crisis room beneath the Pentagon. Within the hour, the room was full. Generals and senior officers stood along the walls because the chairs were already taken. Scientists from 3 different agencies had been patched in through secure video links. 2 senators sat in the corner looking pale. Everyone was talking until Dale walked in, and then everyone stopped. He sat down, looked at the screen showing the fleet in orbit, and said, "Tell me what we know." Lieutenant Nina Park stepped forward. She was young for the room, but nobody questioned her presence because she was the best they had when it came to alien contact analysis. She had been awake for 20 hours already, and it showed in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "The species is called the Vorkai," she said. "We have had limited contact before, 3 encounters over the past 9 years, all brief, all non-hostile at the time. They are larger than humans. Average height close to 3 m. They have a strict hierarchy. Every decision in their military, from a small patrol order to a full planetary assault, comes from one source, the King," Dale said. "King Zerk III," Nina confirmed. "He is on the lead ship personally. That is confirmed by the energy signature of the vessel. It matches the profile of the Royal Command carrier. We identified The second contact 7 years ago. He doesn't send others to do what he considers important work. He came himself. What does that tell us? Nina thought for a moment. It tells us he does not expect difficulty. He came to watch. In Vorkai culture, the king witnesses the submission of a new world in person. It is a ceremony for them. Someone near the back of the room said he came to watch a surrender. Nina did not soften it. Yes. The room was quiet for a moment. Then a general named Owens, a broad man with gray at his temples, leaned forward. What about our weapons, missiles? Can we reach them? Nina shook her head. We tried 3 simulated launches in the first 30 minutes. Their shielding absorbs directed energy and deflects physical projectiles at range. Our best missile would not reach the hull. Our fighters would be destroyed before they closed to useful distance. So we cannot hit them, not with anything we currently have in orbit or on the ground. Another silence, longer this time. Dale looked at the countdown clock. Someone had put on the secondary screen 71 hours and 44 minutes. He thought about 40 ships. He thought about a king who had come personally to watch the ceremony. He thought about a hierarchy where every order flowed from one point. One source, he said quietly, almost to himself, then louder. If the king cannot give orders, what happens to the fleet? Nina looked at him carefully. Vorka commanders are not trained for independent decision-making. Their entire system is built around receiving instructions from above. Without the king giving direct commands, they would not know whether to attack or hold. They would wait for guidance that did not come. How long would they wait? Long enough, Nina said. Dale nodded slowly. He looked around the room at the generals and the senators and the scientists on the screens. None of them were going to like what he was about to say. He said it anyway. I want Colonel Ray Dunbar in this room. Get him on a plane now and tell him to bring his full team. A few people exchanged glances. Most of them knew the name. A few of them had seen in heavily redacted form what Ray Dunbar's team had done in situations that were not supposed to be possible. One of the senators opened his mouth to ask a question and then seemed to decide, looking at Dale's expression, that the question could wait. Ray Dunbar was found at a base in Nevada, running drills in the dark with his team, as he often did when there was nothing specific to do and too much energy to sit still. He took the call, listened without speaking for 90 seconds, said, understood, and hung up. Then he turned to his team of 6 people and said, pack for cold and 0 gravity. We leave in 20 minutes. None of them asked where they were going. They had learned over many years that the destination was rarely the part that mattered. What mattered was the work. When they got there, the plane was already on the runway. When they arrived, engines running, no lights. On the outside, they boarded in silence. The door closed, the plane lifted above them, invisible in the dark sky. 40 warships waited for a planet to surrender. Below them, 6 people were already thinking about how to make that not happen. The countdown read 71 hours and 2 minutes. It was enough. Ray Dunbar was not what most people expected when they heard the word soldier. He was not tall, he was not loud, he did not fill a room with presence the way generals did. He was lean and quiet, with a face that Looked like it had seen too much sun and not enough sleep, and eyes that moved slowly but missed nothing. He drank his coffee cold because he always forgot about it. He wore no medals when he did not have to. He had a habit of standing slightly to the side of whatever group he was in, never quite at the center, always watching the edges. He walked into the crisis room at 4:00 in the morning, looked at the screen showing the Vorkai fleet, and said nothing for almost a full minute. Dale waited. He had been told that Ray Dunbar was worth waiting for. Finally, Ray turned away from the screen and looked at Nina. You said the king is on the lead ship. Personally, yes, Nina said. And without him, the fleet stalls. Based on everything we know about Vorkai. Command structure, yes, they are not built for independent action. The system runs from the top. Remove the top and the system does not know what to do with itself. Ray nodded once. Show me the ship. Nina pulled up everything they had. Exterior scans, energy readings, the structural profile from the 7-year-old contact record. Ray studied it without touching anything, just looking, his eyes moving across the data the way a person reads a page they have read before and are checking for something they missed. Then he said, there is a synchronization pulse. Nina blinked. How did you? Every fleet that coordinates shield timing runs a sync pulse. It is the only way to keep 40 ships aligned on the same defensive cycle. The pulse resets sensors and cycles shields. It creates a window. He looked at her. How long is the window? Nina pulled up the signal data she had not yet presented to anyone. She had found the pulse pattern 2 hours ago and had been trying to figure out what to do with it. 9 seconds, she said, every 4 hours. The room was very quiet. 9 seconds, someone said from the back. And the way they said it made it clear. They thought 9 seconds was not a useful number. Ray did not seem to share that opinion. He pulled out a chair, sat down, and looked at Dale. I need my team, a stealth pod, and whoever built your best hull clamp system. And I need 6 hours with Nina to go through everything she has on that ship's interior layout. Dale leaned forward. You are talking about boarding that ship. I am talking about attaching to that ship during a 9-second window, getting inside before the shields come back up, moving through the interior without being seen, reaching the king, taking him out of action without killing him, and bringing him back. Ray said it the way someone describes a drive to the grocery store, plain, factual, no drama in it. Then we negotiate from a position they did not expect. One of the generals, a man named Owens, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. 6 people against a fully crewed warship with 800 soldiers on board. 800 soldiers who have never had to defend their king from inside their own ship, Ray said. Their entire defensive posture faces outward. They are watching for missiles and fighters coming at them from space. They are not watching their own maintenance corridors. Owen stared at him. You have not even seen the interior layout yet. No, Ray agreed, but every ship has maintenance corridors, and maintenance corridors are always built for the smallest things that need to move through them. Cables, pipes, ventilation, not soldiers. Definitely not soldiers who are 3 m tall. He looked at Nina. Am I wrong? Nina pulled up the structural profile again and studied it for a moment. Then, slowly she shook her head. The Vorkai frame averages 2.8 m. standard maintenance access tunnels in this class of ship are built to 1.4 m clearance. A human could move through them. A Vorkai soldier could not follow. The room shifted. It was a small shift, a change in the quality of the silence, the way people were holding themselves. The thing that had seemed impossible 30 seconds ago had just become something else. Not easy, not safe, but possible. And possible was a different country. Entirely. Ray introduced his team one at a time. Not because the room needed to know their names, but because he wanted them standing in present and already part of the conversation. Calvin Oshie had spent 11 years working zero-gravity construction on orbital platforms. He could move in vacuum the way most people moved on flat ground, naturally, without thinking about it, making small adjustments constantly without effort. He was the one who would get the pod attached to the hull in 9 seconds. Lena Torres could read alien technology, not because she had studied the Vorkai specifically, but because she had a mind that looked at unfamiliar systems and found the logic underneath. Every system had logic, she just found it faster than anyone else. Derek Shaw was a medic and a structural analyst. He could look at a wall and tell you what was behind it. He keeps someone alive in conditions that had no business supporting life. He had a burn scar on his right forearm from a job nobody would ever write a report about. Petra Novick had learned 11 languages by the time she was 20. She had since added 4 more that were not human. She could not speak Vorkai fluently, but she could understand it well enough to follow a conversation in real time, which was the part that mattered. Freddie Grant was the hardest to explain. His official file listed his specialty as infiltration and entry, which was accurate but incomplete. The more accurate description was that Freddie could get into places that were not supposed to be gotten into. Locks, doors, sealed systems, guarded rooms. He approached all of them with the same relaxed expression, as if the obstacle had not yet understood that it was going to lose. Ray himself was the last introduction. He did not describe himself. He just said, "I put the team together and I make the calls on the ground. Whatever happens inside that ship, the decisions are mine." Dale looked at the 6 of them for a long moment. Then he looked at the countdown clock. 68 hours and 14 minutes. "What do you need?" he said. Ray pulled out a handwritten list. It was not long. The items on it were specific and unusual, and in 2 cases required phone calls to facilities that were not supposed to exist officially. But everything on the list was real, and everything on it could be ready within 12 hours. "One more thing," Ray said, folding the list and sliding it across the table. "When we bring the king back, I need someone ready to talk to him. Not a general, not a politician who wants to make a speech." He looked around the room until his eyes settled on a woman near the door who had not spoken once during the entire briefing, but had been writing steadily in a notebook the whole time. "Her," he said. Everyone looked at the woman. Her name was Carol Webb. She was a diplomatic contact specialist who had spent 20 years negotiating in situations where the other side did not want to negotiate. Carol looked up from her notebook, met Ray's eyes, and nodded once. That was enough. The team went to work. The clock kept moving, and somewhere above them a king waited in his ship for a world to break. The stealth pod was the size of a large van and painted in a black that seemed to eat light rather than reflect it. It had no weapons, no engines powerful enough for a fight. It had one job: move fast in a straight line, attached to a surface, and disappear from every sensor that tried to find it. The engineers who built it had spent 3 years on the hull coating alone. It absorbed radar, scattered thermal readings, and bent low-frequency signals around itself like water around a stone. Against a human detection system, it was effectively invisible. Against a Vorkai detection system, they were about to find out. Ray stood in the launch bay and looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at his team. They were already suited up, lightweight pressure suits, no armor, nothing bulky. Armor would have made them feel safer. It also would have made them slower. And, in the maintenance tunnels of a Vorkai warship, slower was a word that led to other worse words. Calvin read a final check on the pods. Clamp system. 4 magnetic anchors on extending arms. Calibrated to fire and lock within 2 seconds of contact. He had tested it 600 times in the past 10 hours. He was not nervous. He was the kind of person who dealt with uncertainty by turning it into repetition until repetition became certainty. Lena was going through the ship schematics one more time on a small screen mounted to her left forearm. The interior layout was incomplete. They had structural profiles and energy readings, but not a full map. There were sections that showed up as blank space, which either meant empty storage or something the scan could not penetrate. She had marked those sections in red on her display and memorized where each one sat. Derek checked his medkit for the 3rd time. Among the standard supplies was a set of sedation canisters developed specifically for Vorkai physiology over the past 8 hours by a team of xenobiologists working off the biological data from previous contacts. The dosage had been calculated for a being of Jarok's recorded size and weight. It would render him unconscious in under 12 seconds and keep him under for approximately 4 hours. The xenobiologists had been very clear about that, and Ray had been very clear that clear was not clear enough. And they had checked it again. Petra sat quietly with her eyes closed, running Vorkai phrase patterns through her head. She would not need to speak much inside the ship. She needed to listen, to catch an order before it was acted on, to hear a patrol schedule, to understand warning before it became a problem. Freddy was eating a sandwich. Ray looked at him. Freddy shrugged. I work better when I am not hungry. Ray did not argue with that. In 14 years of working with Freddie Grant, he had learned that the man's methods were strange and his results were not. That was a trade worth accepting. The window was at 2:47 in the morning. Ship time. The synchronization pulse would fire at exactly that moment, and for 9 seconds. The shields would cycle and the sensors would reset, and the space between the launch bay and the hull of the King's ship would be the most dangerous 9 seconds any of them had ever lived through. They boarded the pod at 2:30. Ray ran through the plan one final time, not because anyone had forgotten it, but because saying it out loud made it real, in a way that thinking about it did not. Calvin gets us attached in the window. Lena finds us a hull entry point. Service hatch, exhaust port, anything that opens from outside. Derek keeps us healthy. Petra listens. Freddy opens what needs opening. I make the calls. He Paused. We do not engage soldiers unless there is no other choice. We move around them. We use the tunnels. We reach the king. We put him under, and we bring him out the same way we came in, clean. Quiet. Nobody gets killed. What if something goes wrong? Calvin asked, not with fear, just practically. Something will go wrong, Ray said. It always does. When it does, we think and we adapt and we keep moving. We do not stop. Stopping is the only thing that actually kills you. Freddy finished his sandwich. At 2:46 the pod launched. The acceleration pressed them all back into their seats for the first 4 seconds, and then Calvin cut the engine entirely, and they coasted in silence and darkness toward the vast black side of the king's ship. No engine meant no heat signature. No heat signature meant nothing for the Vorkai thermal sensors to find. They were rock in space falling toward a wall of iron. At 2:47, the synchronization pulse fired. Calvin's hands moved, the anchors extended, the pod rotated 3 degrees on its lateral axis to compensate for the angle of approach. The hull came up fast, filling the forward screen entirely, close enough to see individual plating lines and heat vents in the marks left by whatever the ship had moved through on its way to Earth. Contact. The clamps fired, 4 solid impacts, one after another, less than a second between them. The pod shuddered and held. 2 seconds later the shields came back up. The pod was inside them now. Ray let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Around him, 5 other people did the same thing, not quite together, each one on their own private schedule of relief. Good entry, he said to Kelvin. Kelvin nodded and said nothing. His hands were very steady. Lena was already scanning the whole surface around them. It took her 4 minutes to find what she was looking for: a service access panel 3 meters to the left, secured with a mechanical lock that was designed to be opened from either side with the right tool. Freddy moved along the hull in his magnetic boots, looked at the lock for 10 seconds, and opened it with a small tool from his vest that had not been designed for Vorkai locks but worked anyway, because locks, Freddy had once said, were all the same conversation in different languages. The hatch opened inward. Warm air came out, carrying the smell of recycled atmosphere and something faintly metallic. Ray last, pulling the hatch closed behind him. They were inside. The corridor beyond the access point was low and narrow, exactly as Nina's analysis had predicted. Built for maintenance equipment and cable runs, not for crew. A Vorkai soldier would have had to crawl on hands and knees to move through it. For the 6 humans, it was tight but passable. They moved in single file, Lena in front, with her scanner, Ray at the back, watching the way they had come. The air was cold, the tunnel was dark, except for the faint blue glow of indicator lights on the cables running along the walls. Somewhere beyond the walls they could hear the deep hum of the ship's systems, the constant working sound of a machine that never slept. Petra held up a fist. Everyone stopped. She pointed at the wall to their right. Through it, muffled but clear enough, came the sound of Vorkai voices. A patrol moving down the main corridor on the other side of the panel, maybe 2 m away, completely unaware. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed loudly. The voices passed and faded. Ray touched Petra's shoulder. She held up 2 fingers. 2 soldiers moving away, not returning. Soon, he nodded and gestured forward. They kept moving deeper into the ship, toward the throne deck, toward the king, who had come to watch a world surrender, and had no idea that 6 small, quiet, utterly determined people were already inside his walls. The maintenance tunnels went on for a long time. They moved through them slowly and carefully, crouching where the ceiling dropped, stepping over thick cable bundles that ran along the floor like roots of an old tree. The walls were warm in some places and cold in others, depending on what was on the other side. Lena kept her scanner moving in small arcs, reading the layout ahead, adjusting their route whenever she picked up movement or heat signatures beyond the panels. Twice they stopped completely because Petra heard voices close by. Once they held still for 4 full minutes while a patrol moved back and forth in the corridor just beyond the wall. The heavy footsteps of Vorkai soldiers, loud enough to feel through the floor. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. They just waited, pressed against the walls of the narrow tunnel until the footsteps finally moved away and the silence came back. Ray watched his team during those waits. That was the moment that separated people who were good at this work from people who were not. Not the action, the waiting. Action was loud and fast, and it carried its own energy that kept you moving. Waiting was quiet and slow, and it gave your mind too much room to think about everything that could go wrong. Calvin stared straight ahead at nothing. Lena kept her eyes on her scanner. Derek had his eyes closed, not sleeping, just still. Petra tracked the sounds through the wall with total focus. Freddy looked bored, which Ray had long ago decided was simply how Freddy's face handled pressure. They were 40 minutes inside the ship when Lena stopped and pointed down at her scanner screen. Ray moved up beside her and looked. The screen showed their current position and the section she had mapped around them. Directly above them, 2 levels up, was a large open space that the scanner read as high-ceilinged and warm, with a single concentrated heat signature in the center that was significantly larger than the patrol signatures they had been tracking. Ray looked at Lena. She nodded. The king. The problem was getting up 2 levels through the maintenance system without coming out into an open corridor. Lena studied the tunnel map for 3 minutes, tracing possible routes with her finger just above the screen without touching it. Then she found it, a vertical service shaft used for running power cables between decks, wide enough for a human, fitted with metal rungs on one wall for technicians to climb. It went from their current level straight up past both floors they needed to cross, and opened into a crawl space directly beneath the throne deck's floor. Freddy went up first to check for obstructions. He came back down in 90 seconds and held up a thumb. They climbed one at a time. The shaft was tight and the rungs were spaced for shorter arms than the Vorkai had, which meant they had been put there for maintenance machines or possibly an older design that predated the current crew. Either way, they held weight, and that was all that mattered. At the top, the crawl space opened up slightly. They could move on hands and knees without difficulty. Above them, through the floor paneling, they could hear something that none of them had heard since entering the ship. A voice. One voice, deep and slow, speaking in long rolling sentences that moved like something heavy being pushed uphill. Petra crawled up the side Ray and put her ear close to the floor panel. She listened for almost a full minute. Her expression did not change much, but Ray had worked with her long enough to read the small signals, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her jaw set. He touched her arm lightly. She turned and mouthed the words to him carefully. He is giving the order. The burning starts in 9 hours, Eastern cities first. Ray looked at the countdown on his wrist. Unit. They had been inside the ship for 53 minutes. They had used most of their buffer. He looked at Freddy and pointed up. Freddy moved to the nearest floor panel and ran his fingers along the edges, finding the seam, checking the fastening. Type. He reached into his vest, selected a tool and worked in silence. He went slowly because going fast made noise. 30 seconds the panel shifted. Just slightly, not enough to see from above, but enough to tell Freddy what he needed to know. He looked back at Ray and held up 3 fingers. 3 fasteners. He showed the tool. Ray nodded. 1 minute and 40 seconds later, the panel was free. Freddy eased it down into the crawl space by centimeters, taking all the weight himself rather than letting it scrape or knock. He set it flat on the floor beside him without a sound. Ray went up first. He came up through the floor into the throne room of King Jarek III of the Vorkai Empire. It was a large space. The ceiling was high and the walls were dark and covered in markings that were somewhere between writing and decoration carved deep into the metal. At the far end there was a raised platform, and on that platform stood the king. Jarek was everything the file had described and more, nearly 3 m tall, armored in dark plating that covered him from shoulder to ankle, with a crown that sat heavy and angular on his head. He stood with his back to the room, facing a massive projection of Earth that floated in the air in front of him. He was speaking into a communication device on his wrist, giving coordinates, giving timings, marking which cities would go first. Around the edges of the room, 4 guards stood at their posts. They faced outward toward the main doors, not inward, not toward the floor. Nobody guarded the floor because nobody had ever come through the floor. Ray came up slowly, staying low, using the shadow at the base of the platform. Calvin came up behind him, then Lena, then Derek with the sedation canisters already in hand, then Petra, then Freddy. Last, easing the panel back into place beneath him out of pure habit. Petra listened for 10 seconds to the king's transmission and then touched Ray's arm twice. He is almost finished. He will turn around when he ends the call. Ray looked at Derek. Derek held up the canister. His hand was completely steady. Ray counted silently. 3, 2, 1. They moved. It took 4 seconds. Later, Ray would think that 4 seconds was almost too long, that someone could have shouted or fired or done something that changed everything. But the guards were facing the wrong direction, and the king was finishing his sentence, and the 6 humans crossed the floor of the throne room like shadows that the room had not learned to look for yet. Derek pressed the canister against the base of Jared's neck at the joint between armor plates where the skin was exposed. The king turned. His eyes found Ray's face. His expression was something Ray had seen before on powerful people. In the moment they understood that the thing that was happening to them was real. It was not fear exactly, it was the sudden and complete collapse of the assumption that they were safe. Jarek opened his mouth. The sedation hit him before the sound came out, heavy and slow like a great tree that has finally given up its argument with gravity. Calvin and Ray caught his upper body. Derek and Freddie took his legs. He was enormously heavy. All four of them felt it. The crown came off his head as he went down and hit the floor with a sound like a bell. One of the guards turned at the sound. Petra was already moving toward the guard, hands raised, speaking quietly in Valkai. What she said later translated roughly: "As the king is resting, you are not needed here. Return to your post." She said it in the flat, authoritative tone of someone delivering an order that had already been decided. She said it without hesitation and without fear. The guard stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the other guards. Then, slowly, he turned back to his post. Freddie picked up the crown from the floor and set it carefully on the platform step. Then he rejoined the others. Ray looked at the king lying still and enormous on the floor of his own throne room. Then he pointed back at the floor panel. They had a long way to carry a very heavy king. They started moving, carrying an unconscious king through the maintenance tunnels of his own warship. Was not a dignified process for anyone involved. Zarek weighed somewhere between 350 and 400 lb, and that was before the armor. The armor added more. Ray had not asked for an exact number, because the exact number would not have changed the plan, and sometimes the plan was better served by not knowing everything about it in advance. They used a carry strap from Derek's kit looped under the king's arms and across Calvin's and Ray's shoulders. His legs dragged behind, his head lolled. The crown was gone, left behind on the platform step, and without it he looked somehow less like a king and more like a very large, very heavy problem that needed solving. The first tunnel section was the hardest. The ceiling was low and the king's armored shoulders scraped the walls on both sides, no matter how they angled him. They moved in short bursts. A few meters, stop, adjust, move again. Sweat came quickly. Nobody complained. There was no air to spare for complaining. Freddie went ahead to check the route. Lena watched the scanner. Petra kept her ears on the sounds beyond the walls, tracking patrol patterns, calling quiet holds when something moved too close. Derek watched the king's vitals on a small monitor clipped to the carry strap, checking the sedation level, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of that enormous chest. 20 minutes in, something went wrong. It was not dramatic. The dramatic version of things going wrong involved sirens and running soldiers and lights. This was quieter and in some ways worse. Lena looked at her scanner and then looked at Ray and said in a very low voice, "There is a maintenance crew ahead of us, 2 of them moving this way. They are in the tunnel." Ray stopped. Everyone stopped. He thought fast. Going back was not an option with the weight they were carrying. Going sideways meant finding a junction that may or may not be on the map. Waiting meant the maintenance crew would walk directly into them in approximately 3 minutes. He looked at Freddie. Freddie was already moving forward past Lena toward the approaching crew. He did not take a weapon. He did not look tense. He moved the way he always moved, easy and relaxed, like a person going somewhere they had every right to be. Ray watched him go and then turned to the others. They pressed themselves in. The king as flat against one wall as possible. In the faint blue light of the indicator cables, it was not much of a hiding place, but it was what they had. They heard Freddy's voice ahead, speaking in sounds that were not words, more like confident noise, the kind of sound a person makes when they are busy and mildly annoyed and have no time for whatever the other person wants. It was not Vorkai language because Freddy did not speak Vorkai. It was something that lived in the space between languages, in the universal tone of someone who belongs where they are and would appreciate not being interrupted. There was a pause, a sound from the maintenance crew, shorter and less certain. Then Freddy's voice again, once more. Still confident, still mildly impatient. Another pause, then the sound of footsteps moving away, back the way the crew had come. Freddy returned 30 seconds later, looking exactly as relaxed as when he had left. Ray stared at him. What did you say to them? Nothing they could understand, Freddy said. But I said it like I was in charge of something important and they were wasting my time. He picked up his end of the carry strap. Again, people understand that in any language. They kept moving. The vertical shaft was the worst part. Getting a sedated 350 lb king down a ladder shaft was a problem that had no elegant solution. They rigged the carry strap through two of the rungs at the top and lowered him by increments. Derek below guiding his legs, Calvin above controlling the strap, Ray in the middle managing the angle so the armor did not lock against the shaft walls. It took 18 minutes and left everyone's arms burning and shaking. At the bottom, Ray gave them 90 seconds to rest. Nobody sat down because sitting down made getting up harder. They stood and breathed and looked at the floor and did not speak. Then they picked him up again and kept going. When they finally reached the service hatch and Freddy pushed it open and the cold black of open space came in, Ray felt something release in his chest that had been locked tight since the moment the pod attached to the hull. He had not let himself feel it while they were inside. Inside, feeling things was a luxury. Outside was a different matter. The recovery shuttle was exactly where it was supposed to be, running dark, holding position 30 off the hull. The pilot, a woman named Grace Ellison, who had been flying black operations transports for 9 years, saw the hatch open and moved to close the gap without being called. She had been told to expect a large passenger. She had not been told how large. When they loaded Zerk through the shuttle's rear hatch, she looked at him for a moment and then looked at Ray. Is he alive? She asked. Very much, Derek said, checking the monitor. Okay, Grace said and went back to the cockpit. They detached from the hull and dropped away from the ship in silence, running dark the way they had come in, putting distance between themselves and the fleet before Grace brought the engines up to full power and ran for atmosphere. Nobody spoke much on the way down. There was nothing to say that the silence did not already cover. King Zerk III of the Vorkai Empire woke up in a conference room in Geneva. It was a plain room, a long table, several chairs, windows that looked out onto a gray morning sky. There was nothing in the room that suggested power or wealth or any attempt to impress him. There was a glass of water on the table. In front of him, there was a woman sitting across from him with a notepad and a pen and an expression that was calm without being cold. Her name was Carol Webb. She had been in rooms like this, facing beings like this for a long time. She did not waste time pretending the situation was something it was not. Zerk looked at the room. He looked at his hands, he looked at the window and then at Carol. He was quiet for almost a full minute. And Carol let him be quiet. Discovered that the world was different from what he believed needed time to arrive at the new version of it. "You came inside my ship," he said. Finally, his English was slow but clear. "Yes," Carol said. "Through the floor." "Yes." He was quiet again. "Then you could have killed me." "Yes," Carol said simply. "We chose not to." "Why?" Carol set her pen down and folded her hands on the table. "Because we do not want to destroy you. We do not want a war. We never wanted to do a war. We wanted you to understand one thing. That when we decide something needs to be done, we find a way to do it. No matter what stands between us and the thing that needs doing." She paused. "And then we offer water." Zerk looked at the glass for a long time. Outside the window, the sky was getting lighter. The sun was coming up over Geneva the way it always did, slow and certain, the same as every morning before and every morning to come. The Vorkai king reached out the glass. He drank slowly. He set it down. He looked at Carol for a long time, and something in his expression moved through several places before settling somewhere quieter and more open than where it had started. "Tell me," he said, "what your people want to." Carol picked up her pen and they began to talk. The fleet withdrew from Earth's orbit 41 hours later. No shots were fired, no cities burned. The agreement that was signed 2 weeks after that did not use the word surrender because Carol had made clear from the first hour that surrender was not what they were building toward. What they were building toward was something that had not existed before between their two peoples. The word they settled on was understanding. Ray Dunbar was not at the signing. He was at a small diner in Virginia, sitting at a corner table, drinking coffee that had gone cold while he looked out the window at nothing in particular. He did not watch the news coverage. He did not read the official statements. He already knew how it ended. Freddie Grant did watch the coverage briefly on his phone. Then he turned it off and put it in his pocket. He had one thing from the mission that he kept, not a trophy, not a report. Just a single photograph taken by Derek's helmet camera inside the tunnel, showing 6 ordinary people carrying something enormous through a dark and narrow space that had no business being passable. He kept it in his wallet. He never showed it to anyone. He never needed to. Some things did not need to be shown to be true. The 40 ships had come, and the 40 ships had left. The cities were standing. The sun had come up over Geneva the same as always. That was enough. That was everything.